The webinar is now streaming live on Facebook, so we are on the air. And the webinar is now live and attendees are joining. I'm going to wait just a moment to begin until everyone sort of takes off their coats, gets in their chairs, adjusts themselves in the conference room. Kevin, can you give me an audio signal when you think we should begin?
Yes, I will let you know when we are ready. Kitty, we are ready.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this important press conference to discuss the lawsuit that Paul Rusesabagina and his family are embarking upon against GainJet, the private carrier complicit in his kidnapping. We will hear this morning from Bob Hilliard, the lawyer in charge of filing that lawsuit. He will explain it to you. Afterwards, we will take questions from the journalists. And again, many of you journalists have joined us for our press conferences before. I would just like to remind you that the Q&A function is at the bottom of your screen. Please put any questions into the Q&A function, and we will field them as they come in. Thank you very much for joining us today, and I would like to now introduce Bob Hilliard. Take it away, Bob.
Kitty, and good morning. My name is Bob Hilliard, and I'm the head of the legal team that has the honor of representing the Rusesabagina family, including Paul himself, who, as we speak to you today, is sitting in a cell in Rwanda, unable to directly speak to his family very much, unable to enjoy due process, and unable to select the attorneys to represent him. Before I get started with the lawsuit, let me introduce Paul's wife, Tassie, and Paul's daughter, Anna Isa, who are together. They're, you can see them in the screen, they're together, and Paul's son, Roger, who also has joined us. Let me start by saying that this week we filed a civil lawsuit in Texas, which is where Paul lived when this saga started. And it seems like facts that are more appropriate for a John le Carré novel than real life, but this is Paul's life and what happened to him. When he was in Texas, he was contacted and asked to come to speak about civil rights, human rights, to a church. Unbeknownst to him, President Kagame, along with GainJet, the charter jet service that ended up taking Paul into Rwanda, had a plan. And that plan was that they were going to wrongly bring Paul into Rwanda, and they were going to try him, this world hero, as a terrorist. The lawsuit was filed in the Western District of Texas, and it was filed both against GainJet, the charter jet service, and the bishop who assisted in convincing Paul to come to Burundi and give the talk. I'll tell you that the facts against GainJet are strong. That is, they have an independent responsibility as an international jet charter service to protect the safety of all of their passengers. Paul has confirmed that while he was on the GainJet charter plane, before it landed in Rwanda, he was bound and tied and thus kidnapped. We believe that GainJet decided to assist President Kagame in his decision to take on this world champion of human rights to try to change the facts of Paul's past and how he helped those in Rwanda, and get rid of a political opponent. Paul had a strong voice in the world and spoke out about the shortcomings of President Kagame's regime. And we lay him out in the 90-page complaint about what President Kagame has done. The example I'll give you in regards to GainJet is this. So GainJet was the only reason that Paul could be kidnapped successfully by President Kagame. GainJet was the getaway car. If you think of it this way, if you're robbing a bank and you decide to shoot and kill somebody, the guy in the getaway car, the guy driving the getaway car is complicit. He's responsible just like the person who pulled the trigger. There is no way that the owners of GainJet, that the pilots of GainJet did not know that Paul was being kidnapped and brought to Rwanda. My hope is that inside this civil lawsuit in the Western District of Texas, which is now in front of Judge Xavier Rodriguez, a very experienced federal judge, that we are able to do civil discovery, that we are able to take the depositions of the pilots. And my hope is that in addition to that, this lawsuit will bring international pressure, justifiably so, pressure on President Kagame to let Paul go. If President Kagame and Rwanda really believed that Paul was potentially responsible for the acts that he's now charged with, they would have reached out to countries and they would have utilized the extradition treaties between countries to have Paul brought to Rwanda. I think that because of that foundational step was skipped, it speaks volumes about the likelihood that this is 100% politically motivated, that Paul's prospects for a fair trial are way past bleak. And though we hope that we can, through this lawsuit and through the pressure of the press and other countries, governments, that we can have Paul released, given President Kagame's track record with his opponents, we're gravely concerned. What I would like to do now is take on questions or pass the microphone to Brian Endless, who is a professor of African Studies. And he is part of our team that tries to make sure that what's going on in Rwanda comes into the press and that everyone is aware of what is happening with Paul. Brian?
Thank you, Bob. I'm just going to very briefly follow up on that. We mostly want to focus on the GainJet Bishop lawsuit today, but we remain in a situation here where Paul Rusesabagina is being illegally held. As Bob mentioned, the facts of the case that are most important are Paul was kidnapped. He was taken against his will from Dubai to Kigali. He did not believe he was going to Rwanda. This lawsuit is focusing on the people who participated in that kidnapping. When Paul got there, both on the plane and afterwards, he was tortured. He was bound on the plane. He was bound for 3 days when he was in an unknown location inside of Rwanda. He was not charged at the beginning. That was a violation of Rwandan law. He is currently being illegally detained. Between kidnap, torture, and illegal detention under international law and under the laws of Rwanda, Paul should be set free now. And a very important concern for us is Paul's health. Paul is a 66-year-old man. He has a heart condition. He is a cancer survivor. He needs to be on medications that he is not getting. And he is in a prison system that was announced over the last week as one of the worst COVID-infested prison systems in the world. All of that cries out for a compassionate release, and we strongly encourage not just the Rwandan government, but our friends in the United States government and in the Belgian government to demand his release and to make sure that he's freed as soon as possible. I think it's probably best now if we turn it over to the press and to see if we have any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. press, we are open for questions now. Please put your questions in the Q&A function, and we'll start with the first question. Bob, the first question that's come in asks, says that you write in the lawsuit that the government of Rwanda paid for GainJet taking Paul Rusesabagina against his will to Rwanda. Do we have proof of that? You also say that GainJet is close to Paul Kagame. On what grounds do you say that? And this comes in from Laurie Brulard from Radio France Internationale in Rwanda.
And we have discovered proof that the invoices from GainJet were paid for by the government of Rwanda and President Kagame. In addition, this is Kagame's jet service. He uses this jet almost exclusively when he flies around the world, including to the United States. We've tracked his tail number through investigations, and he sometimes comes to NBA games in the United States and enjoys the freedom of our country, while at the same time behaving like a strongman dictator inside of Rwanda. He also, we believe, has come to MD Anderson Cancer Hospital in Houston recently, flown by GainJet. So GainJet is being paid by the government of Rwanda, and it is almost exclusively at the beck and call of President Kagame.
And Bob, isn't it true that Kagame used GainJet locating in Rwanda, locating its African base in Rwanda? He talked about that quite a bit in the media and was very proud of that economic development stimulus, as he saw it, to have GainJet have their African hub in Rwanda.
That's right. GainJet is a sophisticated international jet charter service that has supplicated itself completely to President Kagame, and proves that by creating a hub inside of President Kagame's country.
Thank you, Bob. The next question comes in, and I think this is probably more appropriate for Anais, who's been dealing with this, but the question is, what has the EU or the US State Department done to free Paul? And Anais, if you can talk a little bit about the actions of the State Department.
Yes, so currently the State Department is looking into the affair and has been providing some consular service to my father in Rwanda. They've been able to check on him and check on his health, as well as the Belgians. And they've also taken our case with the highest level of State Department from the hostage affairs. And we hope that the team will be able to bring my father back very soon. In regards of the EU, I would say not much has moved in the European Union. We are still trying to advocate the European leaders and the Belgian leaders to support our family and to help my father get free as soon as possible, given everything Bob and Brian just told you about what happened in his arrival in Kigali. Of course, we also have, apart from the State Department, last night, Congresswoman Maloney also tweeted and sent a letter to President Kagame urging him to free my father as well. So we are seeing that the US government is picking up a little bit, but we hope that, in Europe as well, they will do the same thing too.
And Brian, did you want to add a little bit of something to that?
Yeah, just very briefly, on the United States side, we've been strongly encouraging Congress, and we have a number of congresspeople and senators who are helping out, putting together a bipartisan, bicameral letter to encourage President Kagame to free Paul. And we are certainly encouraging our allies at the State Department to help out. We've also filed a similar lawsuit in Belgium with GainJet and Bishop. And as Anais mentioned, we are working both with the Belgian and with the EU parliaments in attempts to have them, again, push harder to free Paul from this situation. We need all of the international pressure that we can possibly put on here. And the press has been very significant in this. And we very much appreciate the fact that the press is keeping Paul's story in the light of day. That is incredibly helpful in bringing out the truth about this.
And Brian, isn't there also legal actions that have been filed in the UN and in the East African Court?
There are, absolutely. One of our first legal actions was to file a complaint with the UN Special Rapporteur on torture. That complaint is now moving forward. Initially, we believed that we had good reason to believe that Paul was tortured, in that every time anyone spoke to him, they were incredibly clipped conversations. It was clear they were being monitored. There were many things that Paul was not able to say because he'd either been instructed otherwise or been threatened if he said them. But then after we got more conversations with Paul, his family speaks to him briefly every week, and his real lawyer in Rwanda has now only been able to speak to him twice. We're well over 100 days now. But once we've had those conversations, Paul has put out even more information about the kidnapping, about the fact that he was bound and that he was blindfolded, and all of those constitute torture. We have similarly put in a complaint in the East African Court of Justice, to which Rwanda is a party, and that complaint talks about the issues that I mentioned earlier, which are the fact that not only does Paul have no chance of a fair trial, but he could not even be in Rwanda and be tried now because of the kidnapping, because of the torture, and because of the illegal detention.
And yes, Bob, I wanted to say, getting back to the kidnapping and Gainjet and how he even got there, can we get back to the US and why are you suing in the US?
Let me start by pointing out that Paul Rusesabagina is a permanent U.S. resident. He has rights and protections under the United States government, and he has a right to expect those. He was the recipient of the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civil medal that can be awarded to a civilian in the United States by President Bush. He's been honored by our country and speaks often around our country about the work that he has done on human rights. Now, for him to be kidnapped and tortured, having been inside the United States, calls out for our country, our Justice Department, to speak up, to stand up, and to reach out to the Rwandan government and say this will not stand. Say that this egregious conduct towards a man who protected others from the same type of conduct his whole life needs to be addressed by our government. We sued in the United States, to answer Kitty's question, because we want answers. There are damages that have occurred both to the family and to Paul. And hopefully Paul will be released, but let's be clear, this lawsuit will not be dismissed if that should happen, because Paul has suffered some extreme damages, and he is a witness to his own damages. The burden of proof and the standard of care inside a civil lawsuit and the discovery process will allow us, hopefully, to learn the whole truth about how Gainjet and how the government of Rwanda cooperated with each other to create a situation where Paul thought it was safe to travel and do what he thought he was put on this earth to do, which is speak out against injustice.
Bob, you've kind of touched on the next question, but if you could elaborate a little bit, how long will the case against Gainjet take, and what are the possible outcomes? What do you hope to accomplish with this lawsuit?
So the first thing that will happen is the complaint will be translated and served on the bishop and on Gainjet through their registered agents. They will then file their motions, and we will have a status conference in front of Judge Rodriguez, to where he will kind of get his head around the case and determine where to go from here and to set deadlines. There's no doubt Gainjet will ask the court to dismiss the case, saying that we don't have jurisdiction in the United States over an international private charter company. We've got proof that Gainjet has utilized the United States justice system in the civil arena when they had a contract dispute with a supplier. And so the law in the United States is it's a goose and gander law. If you use the system to protect yourself, then you subject yourself to the system if others are damaged by you. So the judge will entertain motions to dismiss. He will ultimately allow those to be briefed and ruled on. Should we prevail on the motions to dismiss, he'll then set a schedule for discovery and depositions and trial. And our hope is that depending on how busy the court is, that we can be in trial in San Antonio by the end of 2021, maybe the very beginning of 2022. Again, you know, we have a very, very good judge, but I know that he's busy and it will be up to his schedule.
Thank you so much. And Brian, I think this next question is for you. What is happening in advance of the January trial in Rwanda? Do we expect that trial will actually happen in January? And what are the possible sentences that Paul might face?
Thank you. A few things on that trial. It is coming up quickly, and the biggest issue from our side right now in defending Paul is that he has had incredibly limited access to Rusesabagina, who is his lawyer in Rwanda, and to the international team of lawyers who are still not being allowed inside of Rwanda to assist in his defense. We are looking at potentially pushing that trial back if the legal system allows that to happen, to allow Gatera and Paul more time to prepare their defense. In addition, Gatera can't even get in to see Paul right now because of the COVID situation in the jails. It makes a defense incredibly difficult. When the trial date was set, Paul was indicted with 17 other co-defendants. He doesn't know these co-defendants at all. We have no idea what they're going to say. Although what we do know is they have been in a Rwandan prison system that regularly coerces testimony out of defendants. Human Rights Watch has reported on this many times. And unfortunately, these co-defendants don't have access to good legal counsel. They've probably been provided lawyers by the Rwandan government, and we have no expectations of a fair trial there based on what they might say under coercion from that Rwandan government. So we potentially have a trial in January. It potentially may be pushed back from that point in time. In terms of what the trial will look like, we expect it might be fairly quick, as there is very little evidence. The indictment provided almost no evidence. It was incredibly sketchy in terms of an international legal indictment inside of Rwanda. And then what can happen afterwards? Paul could be subject to 20 to 30 years in jail as a prison sentence. Once again, we continue to push for his compassionate release. We would like to take every means possible to get Paul released even before there is any kind of trial inside of Rwanda. And we feel that international law and Rwandan law strongly support that.
Kitty, I would just add that those who have worked with this government in the past and have seen the results of their legal system believe, unfortunately, that the outcome of Paul's trial is predetermined, that the verdict's written. The judges have been told what to do, and they intend to do what they have been told. And our strong hope is to create international pressure, create pressure through litigation in true jurisdictions that honor due process and the rule of law. Otherwise, unfortunately, there's little doubt that the results of Paul's trial have already been written.
I completely agree, unfortunately.
Thank you. And Bob, I just want to close this out with bringing back one other question and getting a little bit of clarification. You said that we know who paid for the GameJet flight and that Kagame and Kagame's government paid for it. Does he, as a sitting president, have immunity? And what proof, just to clarify, what proof do we have that he paid for this flight?
Thank you for that, Kitty. We have a strong group of attorneys who are representing Paul, and they work hard in the background. And one of my young attorneys who works very hard and who I'm very proud of is Nick Shadowin. And with your permission, I'm going to give him a chance to speak at this press conference, and I'll handle the second part of the question after he's done, but I'll let him address the first part.
Thank you, Nick.
Yes, thank you. So, right, we do have proof that the Kagame regime paid for this gain jet flight that brought Paul to Rwanda. We have statements showing that the regime has used gain jet before in the past to transport other political opponents of the regime. So I think there's strong evidence to show that gain jet is at least when it comes to the Rwandan regime can be better described as a flying prison cell than a private jet charter.
Let me point out as well that Paul Rusesabagina was invited by Bishop Constantine Niyoungera. Now, he's the head of a very small single church, maybe even with a dirt floor, and private jet charters. The cost of the charter that carried Paul is going to be approximately 50,000 American US dollars minimum, depending on where the jet went before that. And not only do we have direct evidence, but there's absolutely strong circumstantial evidence that the only participant in this kidnapping that could afford GainJet's service and that GainJet could trust to pay its bill would be the government of Rwanda. And as even President Kagame pointed out, after Paul had been kidnapped and secured in Kagame's jail, that this was a flawless exercise. He was smug about how flawless everyone executed this ruse and the ultimate torture and kidnapping of Paul. Now, there's no way that a flawless execution could occur without co-conspirators, without others who are assisting. And the biggest part of the kidnapping is the transportation. It's the one thing that that you can't, you got to have a getaway car, and that's what they got with GainJet. And as we mentioned in the complaint, if the pilots suddenly realized that Paul, one of their passengers whose safety they're responsible for, was in danger, there is a way to communicate with international control towers to alert them without letting the people on the plane know. It's the same type of thing of when there is a hijacking on a plane. The pilots made no indication at all, even though the bathroom in this type of plane is in the back of the plane. And for a 6-hour flight, there's no doubt the pilots walked straight past Paul a number of times and never one time got on the radio and squawked 7700, which is the international code for we have a safety problem with our passengers, whose responsibility they have a responsibility to maintain the safety of every passenger, not just the ones that pay them.
And I've got one last question that just came in. Have you tried to reach GainJet, and what has their response been?
So we reached out to the attorney who represented GainJet when they were the plaintiffs in the United States court to see if he was still counsel for GainJet, and he said he was not. We've tried to contact GainJet, and reporters have also tried to contact GainJet. Now that the lawsuit is filed, we'll have to communicate them through their counsel. Once they get lawyers, we'll start talking to GainJet through their lawyers. The next step is to serve them with this lawsuit and to let them step up and explain that they're completely innocent. They had no idea that Paul was in the middle of being wrongly taken to Rwanda, and they never would have stood for it. It surprised me if that's what the facts are, but it's no doubt that's going to be their position.
And in political journalism, the route is always follow the money. And I think in your last answer, it seems like in this case, if we follow the money, it heads straight back to Kigali, Rwanda, and to President Kagame's pockets.
Right. There's only three entities that could possibly hire Gainjet, that's the government of Rwanda, Kagame himself, or the bishop, and you can exclude the bishop immediately. And there's little doubt Gainjet's not going to work for free. So someone did have to pay them.
So I'm not accustomed to closing a press conference with a question, but in this case, I think the question is out there. How can the United States government and the Belgian government fail to act when the facts are clear that Paul Rusesabagina was kidnapped and that Paul Kagame hired the getaway car? Thank you very much for attending today. If there are any other questions, please put them in the chat in the Q&A function right now. Otherwise, we're going to close out and let the complaint speak for itself. Any other questions? Going once, twice, and do any of the panelists want to make a closing comment? All right, well, thank you everyone for participating, and thank you, Bob and the lawyers, for helping us to try to get justice for Paul Rusesabagina. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in our next press conference.
Thank you, Kitty, and thank you, the legal team.